Well, hello, members. I'm Dave Siegel. I'm Executive Director of Housing First Minnesota, and we know that you have questions about federal assistance, employment policies, action at the Minnesota legislature, all related to COVID-19. And so I'm joined today by two experts that can shed some light on these and related topics that are important to your business right now. At the conclusion of the webinar, we're going to provide some contact information. So if we don't answer your question today, well, let us know so we can either do that directly or we may be doing some follow-up webinars. So let me just briefly introduce our presenters today, our two presenters. We have with us Penny Phillips, and Penny is an attorney with Fellhaber Larson Law Firm. She's a fellow with the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers, and she's MSBA Certified Labor and Employment Law Specialist. Welcome, Penny. Thanks for being here. And Mark Foster is Director of Legislative and Political Affairs at Housing First Minnesota. He's a graduate of the Institutes for Organizational Management. And so welcome, Mark. We're glad you're here. Thank you for joining. So just welcome to both of you. Thanks for this opportunity. We'll just get started, I think, with a very first question. One of our members asked, some of our residential remodeling clients who are living in their homes have asked us not to come in. That's understandable. Therefore, we're shutting down production for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Can we use the 10 business days following April 1 to fulfill the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA? And Penny, this one is for you. Can you help us understand what that is and answer their question a little bit?
I sure can. The FFCRA is a federal law that was enacted about 3 weeks ago tomorrow, where it amended the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is another federal law, to give people, employees, time off from work if they are unable to basically have childcare. And also to grant employees up to 10 days of paid leave under very limited circumstances that are related to COVID-19. So the thing to remember about the law, and this will answer this question, is that an employee isn't eligible for the law or for the leave unless there's work available and the employer is making that work available and the employee can't work for COVID-19 reasons. So the answer is, if you shut down, whether it's yesterday or next week, and you don't have any work available to your employees, they're not eligible for any of the federal leave benefits.
And Penny, I know that the first Family and Medical Leave Act really applied to, if I recall right, larger employers, maybe those that are 50 or more. I may not have this exactly right.
Nope, that's right.
Does the expansion go deeper into the size of the business? Is that a change?
It is. It actually applies. The Family and Medical Leave Act provisions apply to all employers with 499 or fewer employees, but there is a small business exception for both the federal, the 10 days of paid leave, and the FMLA. If you can show that giving the the paid leave and the FMLA, if you can show that giving the leave would cause substantial economic harm. So it is a huge expansion. So the FMLA, which doesn't apply to many small businesses, could apply to a smaller business, but only the part that requires an employer to give employee leave if they have to be home with a school-aged child.
And I imagine we're doing this because so many schools are closed now, Penny, right? That's part of what's going on here?
Absolutely. And if your school is closed and you have to be home with a school-aged child, is typically under the age of 18, and you can't work because of that, then you would be eligible for the extended FMLA as well as potentially the paid sick leave.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. Mark, I'm shifting gears a little bit, more job site work. How have permits and inspections been impacted? I know that you and the team have been doing a tremendous amount of work contacting cities and communicating with them. What can you tell us about inspections? What resources are out there to stay up to date, Mark?
Yeah, this has been changing quite a bit over the past couple of weeks, but Housing First Minnesota has been working very closely with our government partners to monitor the situation. And then on March 18th, so it's been about 2 weeks ago now, the Department of Labor and Industry advised that building officials that it's very important to continue to maintain timely inspections. And most cities and most building officials are finding ways, utilizing technology like most of us have been in order to continue to approve permits and perform the necessary inspections. If you do run into roadblocks, either if you're a homeowner or a contractor facing some sort of difficulty with this, they urge you to first try to figure it out with the designated building official or other city officials. And if for some reason either the building official or administrator can't be reached, then contact DLI enforcement staff and they'll help progress from there.
And my recollection, Mark, is that contact information is available, I think, on the Housing First Minnesota website. It seems to me there's a series of tiles up there. And I know you've done some work there. There's some contact information there if you have a problem.
Correct. Yes, right there on the homepage of housingfirstmn.org, you'll see a tile with up-to-date information on the inspections. And we've tried to collect. It's the most comprehensive one out there right now with a collection on a city-by-city basis. And like I said, most are still continuing, and most members are working, albeit at possibly a little slower pace.
I know too, the other area that relates to this is planning and zoning applications, and I think that's still in flux, if I understand right, Mark. Cities are trying to figure out how to meet their open meeting requirements at the same time that they can move projects forward. And
yeah, no, we're still talking about projects that are in the pipeline, whether it be a few weeks away or a few months away. But many cities are getting innovative, and that's encouraging for both our members and for cities. They want to see development continue. But like I said, it just might be at a little slower pace. And but many city councils and planning commissions have been able to continue to hold meetings, continue to have public comment, and we're finding our way through this together.
Yeah. Penny, if a company is open, how does the company comply with the paid sick leave mandate? Will the business be able to recoup any costs associated with COVID-19 leave? I think this is an emergency sick leave provision. It's recently passed, Penny, if I understand right. Maybe explain that to us, and then if we can answer the question, that'd be great.
Sure. The COVID-19 paid sick leave was part of the extended FMLA program that we talked about a minute ago. And there's 6 reasons why an employee can take COVID-related paid sick leave. If they're subject to a state or local or federal quarantine, if they're advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to COVID concerns, if they're experiencing symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis, if they're caring for somebody who is actually also has COVID-related concerns, if they're caring for their kid, if they have to be at school at home because the school is closed, and then there's a kind of catch-all reason for leave that, I'll be honest with you, none of us quite understand what it means, including, I think, the Department of Labor. So you can take, if going back to what we talked about earlier, if there's work available and your employee can't work for one of those reasons, they are eligible for paid sick leave, and it's a kind of sliding scale of how much pay they get depending upon the reasons. So if you take leave for your own serious health concerns, basically, or because you're told you have to stay, you have to self-quarantine, and you get $511 per day, not to exceed $5,110 per employee. If you take it because you're taking care of somebody else or for school, taking care of a child, it's $200 with a maximum of $2,000 per employee. And then how a business recoups the cost is that you get a payroll tax credit for payment of those wages. And the IRS has issued some pretty specific instructions to employers about how to get that tax credit at the time the wages are paid, and a lot of other items related to that. What kind of documentation you need to retain, those kind of things.
And so I'm assuming that the concept here behind this, sort of broadly speaking, behind this, the emergency sick leave is, we don't want sick people on the job site, clearly, right? And then if you have a relative, but you're taking care of someone who's sick, that's kind of but I'm assuming the concept, Penny, is mostly we're trying to prevent people who are sick from coming on the job site. Is that a fair?
No, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to put it. It's that's exactly right. And without penalizing employers. So it's not a perfect solution in the sense that you're not getting reimbursed dollar for dollar, but you are getting a tax credit on the wages, Social Security wages and things that you have to send in when you pay your employees. So it's making an effort to protect employees by giving them wages, protect the general public by making sure that we don't have sick people go to work, and protecting employers by giving them at least some percentage of the dollars that they do pay back. It's imperfect, but
right.
it's a good effort. We'll give them an A for effort.
And I think you mentioned there's sliding scale. There's a cap to this though, right?
Yep. It's a cap, $5,110 for employees they themselves are sick, and then $2,000 if you're taking care of somebody else, or you're at home because your child, you're caring for their child because the school is closed.
Okay.
Excuse
Great.
me.
So Mark, again, shifting gears back over to more on the job site. How long is this shelter in place order in place, and what are you seeing businesses do to adjust? I know it's really important that we adopt those safety practices on the job site. So help us understand that.
Yeah. So last Wednesday, March 25th, Governor Walz signed an executive order to mandate a shelter in place for non-essential businesses and persons. And that order was effective Friday, March 27th through Friday, April 10th. So we're already a week through. We've been told by Governor Walz that early next week, Monday, Tuesday timeline is when he will be evaluating the data, rather to continue with that shelter in place mandate or to lift. But during that, when the initial order came down, there was some confusion from the order itself to corresponding documents, but we were able to figure it out. Lots of emails and questions from many of you, but critical sectors included construction and those that support construction. Real estate transactions are critical. So many of our members have been able to continue, albeit with some adjustments, safety precautions for sure. And we've provided some resources for all of you on job sites to help put signs in place and to help educate your employees to continue to work, but in a safe manner for all of us.
Well, I think that's really critical, Mark. I know some states started out, or some municipalities started out having construction as a critical sector, but then switched that. So I think it's so important for our members, all of you out in the field, so important that you follow the CDC guidelines and the recommendations and the information. If you need it, it's on our website. 6 feet of separation, distancing on the job site, 1 trade per room or per location, and don't gather around at lunch and all look at someone's iPhone and things like that. I think those are really, really important because we do want to maintain that critical business classification. We could potentially lose that, Mark. True? I mean, that's an issue.
Yeah, we have seen that in some one-offs across the country. Single-family construction, for the most part, is by nature social distancing, and so we strongly suggest to keep that distance between all workers. From the folks I've talked to on a daily basis, many employees they're driving to work individually. They're having lunch in their truck individually. So we encourage to keep that going while we work our way through this.
Not sharing tools and so on and so forth. I think if anybody has any questions about that, again, there'll be an email address at the end if you need to know some tips on that would help you to make sure you follow the guidelines. Let us know. Well, Penny, let's talk about. We've talked a little bit about some of the federal legislation. Let's talk about. Can I see a question on there. Can I perform health checks for my employees during the COVID-19 pandemic? So, question about, again, those safety practices. I know seems like some people are beginning to move toward having temporal thermometers on site and those kinds of things. Penny, what should we know?
Yeah, you can, but you need to be very careful how you do quote unquote health checks. We're dealing with now a number of different laws that kind of intersect on the issue of employee health checks, but basically, excuse me, the federal government, the Equal Opportunity Commission, has said that they think you can do health checks through the form of a thermometer, which I think is what most employers are doing. And you do a check at the door and you send people home if their temperature is over a certain degree. I just would urge employers that if you are doing something like that, you do it in a way that tries to protect people's confidentiality. That's really what the EOC is concerned about, and I imagine that the state government, the state anti-discrimination agency would also be concerned. You don't want to say, "Hey, Mark has a temperature of 102. Let's send him home. He's got COVID-19." That would be a bad thing to do. So I've talked to a couple manufacturing clients, particularly in the food business, that are doing checks, but they're trying to do it in a separate room. And then you've got to figure out, taking them aside. And because if they are showing symptoms, then you need to kind of quiz them about whether or not they've been working, how closely they've been working with other people. That doing the quote unquote health checks opens up another series of things that you need to take into consideration as well.
So like in the NFL, when a player gets injured, they take him into the blue tent.
Right, exactly.
Well, and what do you do, Penny, if an employee appears to be sick, they're displaying some symptoms, or they report that they've been exposed, or they test positive? What steps should the employer take?
This is probably one of the most unsatisfactory answers that I can give today, because it's all excuse me, it's all unclear exactly how you're supposed to handle this. I mean, it's much easier if you have an employee that tells you they have COVID-19, you need, as an employer, as a manager, supervisor, whatever your position is, you need to do kind of an investigation and say to the employee, who'd you work with yesterday? What room were you in, or what floor were you on, or whatever the work that they've been doing. Were you close to somebody? Did you have lunch with anybody? Who else did you interact with? Because you've got to go to those people and disclose that they worked with somebody who tested positive. Now, I mean, this is the tough issue, because you're not supposed to be identifying who that person is, but you can hardly talk to the people who might have been exposed without at least giving them a pretty good idea about who you're talking about. But the EOC takes the position that that's confidential medical information. So what I would say is get the employee's permission to use their name, because then at least you can do a better job of trying to figure out who they talked to or who they worked with. So the employee with COVID-19 goes home. The employees who had sort of direct exposure with that employee should probably go home. And the consensus seems to be a 14-day quarantine period.
Self-quarantine.
While that's happening. And that's why I say it's unsatisfactory, because if you're a small business, right, you got 10 employees and they all work together in the same room, you're probably not going to have a lot of employees left by the time you quarantine everybody.
Right. So this is where at least that social distancing takes on that really significant importance. But nonetheless, even so, you may have been socially distanced, but in the same room with that employee, right?
Well, there's that, right? And now, if you read the papers, which I could understand why people wouldn't want to read the papers right now, but there's this whole concern about asymptomatic people
Yes.
who are sort of carriers of COVID-19 and who can pass it on without ever knowing they're sick.
Right. Right. Obviously, sometime in the future, we may get to a place where testing will be much more readily available and much more rapid. We're not there yet. I'm assuming that's where this is headed at some point.
Well, one hopes that you can get rapid tests at some point, so then you'll be in a better position to try to keep your business running and keep your employees safe and not be a threat to public health.
Yeah. It's okay that it's a bit of an unsatisfactory answer because that's the world we're living in, and we all have to understand that.
It is indeed.
So I appreciate the honesty. Mark, thinking about some action at Congress, passed a pretty large bill last week, $2 trillion, I think. What is included in the CARES Act, and what should our small business and business owners know about it that they should be watching for?
Yeah, pretty large bill is an understatement. Last week, President Trump signed the largest economic relief package in U.S. history into law. And so the CARES Act, it's also known as Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, was about $2 trillion support for assistance for businesses, for industries that have been hit hardest, and then direct financial assistance to individuals as well. So with that, there's a lot of segments. I'll try to break them down, just top lines. And so with that, the CARES Act established a new loan category for Small Business Administration, SBA. I'll get into that a little more in a later question here. Additionally, there are employers whose activities are suspended by government restrictions may be eligible for refundable credit against payroll tax liability. The so-called recovery rebates that many folks are interested in on an individual basis provides direct cash assistance to American taxpayers. The base rate, $1,200 per taxpayer for those that make less than $75,000, and then $500 per child. Housing-related provisions include federally backed single-family mortgage holders to receive forbearance for up to 1 year for those experiencing COVID-19 hardships. There's a 60-day ban on foreclosures on government-backed mortgages. There's also a 120-day moratorium on all evictions and related fees. So, with all this, there's been some confusion. Some folks have said, well, there's either a rent or a mortgage holiday. That is not the case. Rent and mortgages are still due. If you're having a hardship, many landlords and or mortgage companies are working with those folks to either delay the payment or to find a reduction. But rent and mortgages are still due.
Still doing it. So don't make the mistake of thinking that this is in fact a waiver. It's a delay. It's a pause and an ability to maybe work some things out. Hopefully work some things out.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, some employees of mine have expressed that they are high risk. I think, Penny, this is a little bit related to that previous question, but these may be folks who have underlying medical conditions. Maybe they're fearful of being on the job only because they really have, some sort of diabetic or some sort of underlying medical condition. What should a business do in that case? Is there anything uniquely that they ought to address?
Excuse me. Well, I think the CDC has issued guidelines on who the CDC considers to be at-risk employees or at-risk people, which would include the employees. And I think you listed off some of those people over 65 with if you have a immune disorder, asthma, diabetes, etc. And if you have an employee that falls into this classification and they come to you and tell you that they're high risk and they're concerned about coming to work, that could be a situation where that employee would be eligible for some of the emergency paid sick leave. But it has to be a situation where they get a doctor's note or recommendation that says they shouldn't be at work. Again, going back to the theme that this paid leave is for people where are situations where there is work available, but someone can't work because of COVID-related concerns. So if your employee expresses their concern or expresses their high risk, they can go, you can encourage them to go talk to their provider and to get some kind of documentation that they shouldn't be at work. And if that happens, then they're likely eligible for the paid sick leave. You're eligible for the payroll credit for a minimum or a maximum of 10 days. After that, what happens? Well, basically, most employees are probably going to have to go on unpaid leave after they exhaust the federal paid sick leave, because there's not any there's work available and they can't work, and there's not going to be a payment in that situation. But they could also apply for unemployment.
That was my next question. Could they apply for unemployment in that instance? Yeah.
Yeah, the governor's order on unemployment is incredibly broad. Really, really, really broad.
Got it. Mark, we talked a little bit about that CARES Act, and you talked a little bit about the SBA, and I mentioned that we may do a whole session about that, but give us a little bit more about what we need to know on the loan availability for your small business or your business.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of options created for small businesses in the past few weeks, both from the federal level and from the state level. There's economic industry disaster loans, there's paycheck protection programs, the pandemic unemployment assistance program, small business emergency loans, and even more. I strongly encourage anyone that's considering any of these to visit the Minnesota Employment and Economic Development Agency, Minnesota DEED. They have created a phenomenal page that lists the differences between all of these and guides you to what may be the best option for you. And I'd also encourage you to contact your insurance company and or your bank or financial institution to walk through your options. I know many bankers are working night and day, long hours, trying to help folks navigate all their options. So they're the experts. They can guide you through all the options that are out there currently.
And I know some of these are loans that have, they're low interest loans. Some of these have a forgiveness component if you retain a certain number of your employees. I think those are all pieces, and those are different vehicles. So it does behoove you to contact your local banker, check out the DEED site, Mark. I think those are good suggestions.
Yeah, there's lots of different interest rates and forgiveness and this, that, and the other. So DEED kind of, like I said, shows the different options and see which route might be best for your business.
And to further confuse all of our members, I understand that Congress is actually thinking about yet another stimulus piece, and we don't quite know what's going to be in it, but likely there will be more. Because this is an unprecedented time. I forget what they're calling it. I think it's the coronavirus 4 or something, because there's been 3 pieces of federal action maybe already, and there's a 4th one in the works. So I would just say stay up to date, check out our website, check out the DEED website. Appreciate it, Mark. Well, Penny, what, talked a little bit about if there's work available. What if there's not work available? Thankfully, we're hearing from our members to date that things seem to be relatively strong, maybe surprisingly strong, but I know there's a concern about a pipeline down the road. What happens if they don't have enough work and they're looking at that difficult challenge of a layoff or a furlough of some of their team. What's the difference? Can you help us understand that a little bit?
I sure can. Excuse me. There's not really, though, unfortunately, not really legal definition. So a furlough is typically thought of as being a temporary layoff. And I'm not, and I want to be clear, I'm not talking under any union contracts here, but just in general, there's lots of employers that are putting their employees on temporary furlough, so for a month or until the Governor Walz's order after April 10th, that kind of thing. So a furlough suggests that it's temporary, and a furlough then can, what I say, sort of morph into a layoff. A layoff is something more permanent. But even a layoff isn't necessarily forever, just depending on the circumstances. So I've been telling clients you can say, I'm putting you on a temporary layoff or a furlough. You can seek unemployment. And then if, as time goes on, as you said, the pipeline slows down, then that may change from a temporary layoff or a furlough into a layoff where they're truly separated from employment.
So both with a layoff and with a furlough, Penny, just as essentially somewhat the same terms, the individual does qualify or can apply for and qualify for.
Absolutely. Great question. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's, all the people that were out of a job when the restaurants closed, the sit down part of the restaurants, they're all eligible. And again, they may be on, their employer may have told them you're on a layoff. They may have said you're on a furlough. It's kind of a semantic game. They're eligible for unemployment because they don't have any work available.
And I think I understand that some companies are also saying first use up your PTO and then move into a furlough, or is that true? I mean, I'm just wondering what you're seeing in the marketplace.
I'm seeing most employers actually not do that. Why? Because any compensation that an employee gets at the time they're put on a furlough can potentially offset their unemployment benefits.
I see.
And so if I let an employee take 3 weeks of vacation as part of their quote unquote furlough, that might delay their receipt of unemployment benefits. Whereas if I just put them on a furlough, they can apply right away because the governor got rid of the waiting period.
I see.
The other piece of it too, just as something to think about, I think everybody's hopeful that those employees will come back and then they'll have the ability to have some PTO for fun things like, excuse me, a vacation or something.
And so part of what the governor did in his action was to make that unemployment insurance available more rapidly than was previously the case. There was
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it used to be you could apply and then you'd have a week where you wouldn't get the benefits, the waiting week. And that was the first thing he got rid of, was eliminating that waiting week.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your members are familiar with this because of the seasonal nature of some of the work.
Yeah.
So that you have to wait a week, and this just gets rid of that. So if people are eligible right away.
And then I do understand that the website's been fairly busy. So it seems like there may be some challenges for the individual employee, but sort of that's beyond our kind of control, right? That's something the state government's dealing with.
That's right. What they issued, I believe, earlier this week was a request for people to apply by the letter of their last name. So, on Mondays, people are, I believe that's right. People A through F, and Tuesdays, etc.
Got it. We talked a little bit about what some of the actions the governor's taken. Mark, what about the state legislature? What has been going on there? I know they're still meeting. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
Yeah. So in an unprecedented move, the Minnesota legislature recessed on March 17th, but allowed themselves the capability to return upon agreement from the legislative leaders. And that they did last week. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate gavelled back in to approve an additional $330 million package to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Minnesota. Some of the items included in that bill created $30 million to create an account for small business emergency loans that Deed's working on, and then $10 million to the small business emergency loan account. Myself and members of our team are in touch with leaders there in St. Paul every day of the week. And, you know, they are currently recessed till April 14th. They might meet prior to that to address a few items, or they might wait until April 14th and address some stuff then. So kind of just watch our communications for updates that could impact you and or your business.
Yeah, and they're doing the same thing we all are, trying to figure out how to meet in a new environment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's difficult. Very difficult.
Well, Penny, I think we may have answered this question. I think, you know, are my employees eligible for unemployment if I put them on a furlough? I think we answered that as yes. I think we did get a clear answer to that being yes. And then maybe the second and related question, does a temporary layoff or a furlough trigger any obligation under COBRA? What about health insurance for these employees?
Well, I'm going to make my standard lawyer joke, which is it depends. So, so what you want to do if you're the sponsoring entity of the health insurance plan is to talk to your health insurance, and see if they'll extend the benefits as though your employees were actively employed. And I know the Minnesota health insurance group has been really great about this. So, for example, one client has their health insurance company saying, yes, we'll extend the benefits through June. And so in that situation, the employer will pay the employer's portion of the health insurance, and the employee will pay theirs as though they were actively working. We'll have to see what happens in June, if there's any kind of emergency extension or not. But at the end of June, then those employees will be subject to COBRA. In the absence of any agreement with your health insurance, if the employee's not actively working, frequently those insurance plans say that you have to COBRA the employee. So it is a little bit of that's why I say it depends. It may depend on, if your employee's part of a union, it may depend on your plan. It may depend on what your plan says. There's lots of things that you have to look into before you say, yeah, you have to COBRA them. No, you don't have to.
And are those employees also, is there and I just don't know this, is there an open period yet for the exchange if they were to go on the exchange and try to obtain insurance? Penny, what is the story there?
To be honest with you, I don't know that there's a lot of information out there about that, but I do understand that they have temporarily halted some of the deadlines so that people can try to apply. But I can't speak to that much more than to say they're making efforts to do so.
Got it. Well, Mark, and I know we talked about this a little bit, and you mentioned it. We're in this shelter-in-place order. Can you just give us a flavor for what businesses in our field are deemed essential? You've had some questions from people. Maybe give us an example or two of what you found.
Yeah. So like I mentioned a little earlier, the executive order and some of the corresponding documents were very confusing from the get-go, but they've since clarified those documents. Critical sector includes basically all kinds of construction, whether it's an electrician, plumber, HVAC, that extends all the way to those that support construction in some capacity. So, I've had questions from some folks, stagers for homes that need to get furniture either into or out of a house that is about to be closed on. So with that, they are considered critical as well.
Well, and real estate was also considered a critical sector as well, right? So
yes, real estate. Actually, I moved in. A friend of mine just this past weekend, he was moving apartments. So people are still continuing to either move into a house, an apartment, etc. And it's pretty cool to watch how some folks are getting innovative with technology. If you still want to view a home, many of our members are open by appointment only, but you can view a new home or in the existing inventory as well. Realtors are working with clients, and then you can do a drive-by closing. Many banks are opening up their drive-throughs to finish off the paperwork. So yeah. We can still continue to close. The housing market is still working, functioning, and like you said earlier, David, maybe to the surprise of some, there's many buyers out there still looking and that are purchasing because interest rates are low, and there have been some folks that maybe have been on the sidelines and now have an opportunity. There may not be as much competition, especially at that entry-level price point.
I've heard that same thing, that folks are thinking maybe now they can actually, they tried previously to get a house and it was so many offers and they weren't able to, and now they're thinking perhaps it's a little less competitive and they're able to secure that house that they've been looking for. So it is interesting. I'm sure we're going to continue to get some questions about whether something is or isn't critical infrastructure. And I know DEED continues to update that list.
Yeah, and at its simplest form, I've been saying in order to shelter in place, you have to have shelter. So yeah. Many of almost about 100% of our businesses are involved in either in shelter. So yeah, that's what you get.
Very helpful. Penny, if I'm keeping the employees working, but as we talked about, maybe that pipeline quiets down. Hopefully it doesn't, but maybe it does. Can I do reductions due to an economic downturn? What are the conversations that businesses can have with their employees, and how do you do that the right way?
So that's a tough one. All right. So I want to draw a distinction right off the bat between employees who are exempt from overtime and our employees.
Sure.
So employees who are salaried exempt, they receive a salary every week regardless of the number of hours they work. So they're either an executive, administrative, professional employee, outside sales. Those are the federally recognized exemptions. You have to be careful, or you can do prospective salary reductions of those employees and still maintain their exemption from overtime, but you need to be careful about how you do that. And lots of employers are doing this, where there's some employers are doing a week of pay and then a week without pay, no work, no pay, a week of pay, a week without work or pay, as a way to reduce salaries or reduce costs. But the thing you have to keep in mind when you're working with a salaried exempt employee is that you can't do partial day deductions. So if I work a half day Monday through Friday, you can't, well, you need to be careful about, I shouldn't say you can't, but you need to be very careful about how you pay that person and how you track their salary, because you could inadvertently create a situation where somebody could argue later on that they're not an exempt employee. And they're eligible. And what's the consequence of that? Well, then they'll come back and say, no, I didn't really only work 40 hours a week. I worked 60 hours a week and you owe me overtime, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the question about the salaries is probably an hour-long conversation, and no, it's incredibly boring. I'll just add too. So I'm happy to answer other questions about it, but I don't want to put everybody to sleep. Excuse me. For employees who are being paid on an hourly basis, you could reduce their hourly rate, but again, you got to keep in mind Minnesota's minimum wage, and that you have to pay them overtime. Yep. So you've still got to comply with the law. You can take steps to to reduce your overall cost. But at the end of the day, you've got the minimum wage. And for me, the bigger concern is always failure to pay overtime. That was a super long answer. Sorry.
No, that was helpful. You do hear some companies that are sort of doing like an across the board, 5% reduction. I imagine that's okay. That's sort of everybody.
Absolutely. Yep.
Everybody's treated the same. You're just doing it across the board in all your employee base, right?
That's right. And I have another client in the construction industry that's doing, 10, 20, 30% cuts depending upon where they are in the pay scale.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, helpful. I think we have one more for you, Penny, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. And I think we did talk about this. We didn't answer this question. Do you need to report it to OSHA if the employee is exposed to COVID-19, or if that employee, him or herself, comes in and says, I'm now tested positive, or I'm symptomatic, or something like that?
Well, the problem with COVID, right, is if it's just if the employee comes in and says, I'm exposed, you don't know that they necessarily got it at work. They could have gotten it in a number of different places. So I think the conventional wisdom right now is you don't necessarily have to report in that situation. But if you have a known exposure at work, and again, it's not 100%, but you've got a COVID positive employee who worked with another person and gave them COVID-19, then that's considered to be a reportable event.
Okay. And then I think last on the list for now, and we so much appreciate, Mark and Penny, your time, will I be subject to a workers' compensation claim if an employee contracts COVID-19?
Well, I think the presumption is right now that unless you're a healthcare worker and you get COVID-19, you're not going to be covered by workers' comp. Now, I'm saying that based on a conversation a little bit longer than a week ago. So I don't think you have to immediately assume if someone has COVID-19 that they got it at work, because there's so many different ways to get it.
Yeah.
But again, if you have, let's say you report it you report it to OSHA, you can certainly turn it over to your workers' comp carrier. But my guess is, or I shouldn't say guess, my understanding is they're going to deny most claims.
Okay. And I would guess that this is an evolving area, Penny,
my goodness. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying what I should have said.
Well, I'm just guessing that these things,
yeah.
I liked how you said this was a conversation a week ago, because in our world these days, a week, seems like 5 years.
Oh. We'll measure it in dog years. Yes.
Yeah, we're measuring dog years. Well, so much want to thank you, Penny and Mark, for the excellent information. If we did not get to a topic that members you have an interest in, please let us know. We want to continue these informational webinars. We want to, answer your questions directly. Tom, there's a slide here. Tom's running our show here, so I appreciate, Tom, very much the work you're doing. Housingfirstmn.org is the website for information and resources, and then questions for future webinars, or we can direct these also to our two panelists. It's tom@housingfirstmn.org, and go ahead and send those questions, and I'm sure we'll do our best. Both Penny and Mark will do their best to answer those. So thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate the time, appreciate the knowledge and the information. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll check back in a little bit. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.